Steve Downs graduated from Cornell Law School in 1969 after previously serving for 2 years in the Peace Corps. He spent most of his legal career as the chief attorney for the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, disciplining quote-unquote bad judges. He retired in 2003 and in 2006 volunteered to be part of the defense team for Yassin Arif, a local imam charged with terrorism-related offenses. When other similar cases were discovered, Downs became a co-founder of Project Salam. In 2010, Project Salam became one of the 18 founding members of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, known today as the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. I wanted to inject my own 2 or 3 lines for Steve. When I came to the coalition, Steve is so inspiring, and Steve is the person that literally keeps the team going. So when he doesn't hear from us for like 2 or 3 days, he's like, what are you doing to get this Eagle bill going? He is so, the energy he has, the space that he welcomes us in, the way he sort of motivates us to also celebrate our 80th birthday, which we just did this summer, to continue to do the work, is unparalleled. And I wanted to thank him in front of everyone for being that inspiration.
That's the worst possible way you could start me off, because I'll never rise to that level.
Oh no, you're right higher.
You guys are great. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm particularly happy with being here with you all because we all share a bond. We've all been wounded by injustice. And because of that, we are a family. This is a wound that we can share. We can talk about it. Sometimes it's hard to talk about it outside. But we are family in here, and we can talk about it. And when I say that, I include myself because of my representation with Yassin. And part of Yassin Arif, part of my job as a volunteer attorney in this case was to get out and just talk to him in jail because he was alone in solitary confinement waiting trial, and his life was very difficult there. He needed to talk. He's a kind of a very person that he needs to talk. So I got to know him very well. I ended up helping him write a book about his life, and I consider him one of my best friends. So all I can say is that I also share that. God, I didn't mean to get all choked up about it, but anyway, I understand where you're coming from, and that's why this organization is important, and why we need to keep talking to each other, need to keep coming back, need to keep the movement alive. Because if we start to talk with each other here, we can talk about it outside. When I saw Yassin's charges against him, I couldn't, they made no sense to me. To this day, they still don't. It's a nonsensical case. And after he was convicted of material support for terrorism, the FBI and the prosecutor were very proud of themselves, and they called a press conference to explain what happened and why they did. And they were getting a certain amount of pushback from the press. And one of the reporters asked, they said, well, yeah, I mean, we saw the trial, we listened to all the evidence, but do you have any evidence that he actually was a terrorist? And the prosecutor was sort of caught by surprise, and I think when he was caught by surprise, he actually blurted out the truth. And he said a sentence which is sort of seared into my mind, and I never forgot it. And he said, evidence that he was a terrorist? No, we don't have any evidence. But he had the ideology. In order to preempt anything from happening, we did this thing. And that, to this day, I think remains the clearest description of what preemptive prosecution is about. And that's where the phrase preemptive prosecution came from. At Project Salam, we invented that phrase so that if anybody criticized us for us, we could say, no, it was the government that said it, that said they were using it to preempt somebody from committing a crime. We're going to charge people with crimes before they commit the crime. Now, they said it was based on his ideology. That was complete nonsense. Yassin had no terrorist ideology whatsoever, and it was absolutely clear from the transcripts and the tapes that he always talked against it when the FBI informant was there. But anyway, that's where he was. And so eventually, Kathy Manley and I over here, who also worked on the case together, we began to find other cases around of preemptive prosecutions. And we eventually formed a group called Project Salam to discuss that, and eventually published a report, Inventing Terrorists, in which we got together, we analyzed all of the cases that the government was saying were terrorism cases. Now, preemptive prosecutions, by their nature, do not involve any underlying crime. It is the government that is creating the crime, the government that is creating the situation in which they can charge them, and it is directed only at the Muslim community or some other targeted community. It's not as though they apply this equally across the board. So, using that analysis to look at these cases that the government was claiming were genuine terrorist cases, we could show that 94% of them involved preemptive prosecution. That this was a huge program by the government, very similar, almost identical in some respects to the COINTEL program, to basically terrorize the Muslim government, Muslim community into becoming obedient and loyal, I suppose, from what the government's point of view would be. And one of the things that always struck me about it was that they weren't bringing in informants to go and try to talk to CEOs of major corporations into engaging in tax fraud, right? Why wouldn't they do that? They know that CEOs of major corporations engage in tax fraud all the time. Why wouldn't they try to entrap them in that? Well, because that's not the point. The point of all of this is they have an entirely different agenda. The reason for bringing these cases is a different agenda. And unfortunately, I think the prior panels have laid it out very clearly what the alternative agenda is. It has nothing to do with saving the country from terrorism. It has to do with helping the FBI gain power and influence. It has a chilling effect on the Muslim community. It justifies the government's interest in surveillance. They want to be able to survey Muslim communities, and so that they can only justify that based on special clandestine, classified programs that will allow them to survey. And it helps them, terrorism helps them frame the narrative as a them against us, as a Palestinian against Israelis, but also American Muslims against the democracy. And in doing that, in framing that narrative, it allows them to do things politically that otherwise they couldn't do. So I wanted to just quickly go through some of the techniques that are used. One of the major ways of doing preemptive prosecutions is entrapments. And I want to resist the temptation because there's so many of these cases. With CCF, we have over 200 cases now that we're sort of working with. And it's very tempting to go through all of the outrageous fact scenarios here. But I think the key factor, the thing that you need to remember is that there is no underlying crime here. Nobody gets hurt, nobody gets killed, no property damage, nothing happens. These are ideological crimes as far as the FBI is concerned. And the ideology is the ideology that the FBI is putting out there has nothing to do with terrorism. So what they would try to do is bring in people, particularly people from the Muslim community, who can act as informants to try to talk other Muslims into doing something that could be charged as a crime. This is dangerous from a number of points of view because oftentimes what they're trying to do is get information. In other words, if you can get somebody to do something under, we'll get a legal hook on them, you can turn them and get them to become an informant. And that informant can go out and talk to his brothers or sisters and get them to say things into a microphone or into a tape recorder, which then can be used to turn them and get them to become informants. And this is a constant push in the use of entrapments. It's not even so much to bring charges often, it is to get information, to get people who will go into mosques and report back to the FBI on the danger that they will be charged if they don't. Several things that the FBI does, it's not, of course they try to say, raise some sort of a terrorist plot and then involve people in it, but very often one of the techniques that they use is a friendship. There have been any number of cases in which the informant has been encouraged to become extremely close friendship with the people they are working with. Because very often somebody could be induced to do something that it might be illegal out of friendship, not because they are in any way interested in terrorism. There was the famous Nick Young case, I guess, and I didn't want to do this, but I'm just going to mention it, who was I believe the first Muslim police officer in DC. And at one point he wanted to grow a beard. And because he always said, what guy you get out of the mosque, I'm the only guy without a beard on. You know, I think I should be able to grow a beard. And the police department had a clean shaven policy. So they said, well, maybe I can get a religious exemption. So he went to his superiors and said, can I have a religious exemption? And they go, oh sure, yeah, you can grow a beard. And then they're radicalized. And then they sent in a informant to try to talk him into saying something illegal that they could get him charged with. And he wasn't going to do it. He turned them all away. He says, don't talk to me about that stuff. That's crazy stuff. Don't talk to me about violence. We don't do that kind of thing. And so the first informant dropped out. So they sent in another one. And he talked about it, same thing. Come on, bro, we're best friends. We go to basketball games, we hang out together, we spend months together being best friends. Don't you really want to go to Syria and fight? Wouldn't you really like to go over there? Think how cool that would be, And he wasn't going to do it. He said, don't go, it's illegal, you shouldn't go. And then the FBI informant says, bro, I can't hold back anymore, I gotta go. So he pretends to go over to Syria to fight. And then sends back an email saying, God, it's awful over here. I'm starving. There's no food. Can you send me some money? Just send me something so that I can survive over here. And so he ended up sending him a couple $100 worth of gift cards so he could survive over there. And that was enough. That was material support for terrorism. And at the trial, and this has always stayed with me, this is the trial, his lawyer asked the prosecutor, he said, if you hadn't gotten him with a second informant, how much longer would you have gone? How many more informants would you have sent after him until you got him? And the prosecutor said, probably forever. And I think that one phrase, probably forever, so clearly defines what preemptive prosecution is about. You decide you want to get rid of this person for whatever reason, and then you just keep doing it. You go back and over and over and over again. And the same thing is true of Samuel Arian, who organized CCF. And he was one of the few people that actually beat the charges. He was not convicted in a jury trial. The prosecutor just backed up again, went around again, and brought new charges in Virginia. And they would just probably go after him forever until they got him. So that's entrapments. And then the next thing is to another technique that they use, and it's about half the cases, I think, is to try to criminalize legal rights. You have a right to free speech, the association, to make donations to charities, to what else? To travel. So they got a right to travel. But if they can show in some way, because of your radicalized nature, that they can invent by cherry-picking stuff and getting that together, that all of these activities were done in some way to support a terrorist organization, even if it didn't support a terrorist organization, then they have the kind of thing. The Holy Land case is probably the best example of it, in which these people did nothing except truly generous, charitable work. And they were able to spin this to say, yeah, but this, in some way that you didn't foresee, helped a terrorist organization, which I don't even think is true. And a third way that very often they get people is with conspiracy theory. It is very easy. Conspiracies are, of course, an agreement to commit a crime. It's very easy to talk people into kind of generally saying things, loose talk about what to do. But well, I guess the best way I could describe it is the Fort Dix 5 case, where you had a bunch of guys that would sit around and they were like to talk. And they sent in an informant who liked to talk with them, and they would talk and talk and talk about all sorts of things that were going on in the Middle East. The informant trying to push them into something illegal, and they were saying, no, we don't want to do that. Well, what about this? We should do this. Finally, at some point, the informant pushes them to say, well, listen, we have to do something about this situation. Look at the situation in the Middle East. Look at the situation. We have to do something. And one of them said, yeah, you're right. We really have to do something. And then they said, well, what about doing this? Or what about doing that? No, we're not going to do that. So they never had a plan. They never had a location. They never had a time. They never had a plan to do anything except a general, we need to do something about the situation. And the government said, that's a conspiracy, for which they are now serving life. Life. For a conversation, a series of conversations, in which there was never a plan. So, conspiracies are very dangerous. Loose talk is very dangerous, and that's one of the other things that they do. So all I'm saying, just in conclusion here, and then maybe you have kind of open up, I hope that one of the tendencies I think happens when you get wounded by an injustice is you retreat into yourself. You don't talk. You don't talk about it. And I find myself, I talk to my friends and I go, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going down to D.C. What are you going down there for? Well, we're having a conference. What are you having a conference about? Well, all right, it's an organization that's trying to support wrongfully convicted terrorists. And there's this dead silence, and everybody goes, oh yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, oh well, look at the time. I understand people don't necessarily want to go there. There is a world of pain there. But we have to talk about it, and we have to be willing to engage people in it. And so I hope that one of the things that comes out of this conference is a new determination on all of your parts to speak out, to talk about what you've learned here, take it back to your communities. And if you take it back to your communities and you need help, call us. We'll come out. We'll help you any way we can. Because that's how we slowly build a movement. So thank you all. You're great. I love all of you.